Welcome to True Crime by Indie Drop-In. Each week we feature an episode from the best independent creators. Hit subscribe for more great true crime content. If you would like to support Indie Drop-In and get these episodes ad-free, check out our Patreon at the bottom of the show notes. Today's episode is from Career Criminals. Don't forget to check out the show notes for links to subscribe and follow on social media. Enjoy the show.
Begin.
In today's episode, we will be investigating the Circus casino heist, a crime always found in top 10 casino heists of all time and pegged as one of the largest in Vegas history. This remarkable crime took place in October 1993, Las Vegas, USA, and saw the theft of $3.1 million. It was described as the perfect crime, but you'd be wrong in thinking it was executed by a career criminal. The robber was a girl just 21 years of age with a clean record who turned her attention to casinos with a new boyfriend for a want of a better, richer life. This is the story of the Circus casino heist. Hello and welcome to the podcast where we crack open the best heist stories throughout history.
Well, he decided to reenact the crime exactly as it's taking place.
We find the defendant guilty.
From train robberies to bank raids, and art napping to diamond looting, we're investigating the work of thieves. I'm Lauren, and I'm joined by my co-host Frankie, and this is Career Criminals. I truly feel this is the right thing to do, said Heather Tallchief as she turned herself in to the federal police in downtown Las Vegas. It's 2005 and she is 33 years old. Her lawyer, Robert Axelrod, tells the media there is no doubt that Heather is the person who stole $3.1 million from the Circus casino back in 1993.
Oh, the dream is alive, Lauren. I've been looking forward to a casino heist. Ocean's 11 will always have a place in my heart. Brad Pitt, eat your heart out.
I know, right? But why did this attractive young lady decide to rob a casino? How the hell did she get away with it? And why did she turn herself in? Let's go back to the start. The Circus Casino Hotel opened on October 18th, 1968. It's pretty old in Vegas history. The casino is part of a resort which offers a fun-filled, all-ages Las Vegas adventure at an affordable price. A place immortalized by Hunter S. Thompson in the famous book Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and the 1971 James Bond film Diamonds Are Forever. It's located on the northern side of the Strip, set quite far back from the main action, and the surroundings are quite desolate.
It also featured on Austin Powers too, and Honey, I Blew Up the Kid.
Yeah, it's had a lot of screen time, as have most Las Vegas casinos. It even made it into gaming in Grand Theft Auto. Huge and chaotic, this casino, come 3-star hotel, has just under 4,000 rooms, an on-site amusement park, and surprise, surprise, hourly circus performances which are all set around a giant circus-shaped structure. Sadly, the reviews of this place are lackluster nowadays. It's regularly described on TripAdvisor as drab, worn out, and outdated, and missing the all-important mini-fridge in every room. With a 3.5 rating, the accommodation is not that far different from your run-of-the-mill motel. It would be unusual to see any fashionable Vegas folk on the casino floor. It's rather drab too, with low, imposing ceilings. You're probably more likely to find gamblers well into their retirement here, sitting on stools at the penny slots with their cups. Nevertheless, as it did at the time of the crime, Circus attracts thousands of guests.
Oh, you've really sold it to me there. I definitely want to go.
Nevada in the 90s was thriving, growing faster than any other state in the US.
Yeah, in this decade, the population grew by 66%. Largely due to people moving there to work in newly established tourist spots.
Many things of note happened here in this decade, shaping Vegas as we know it today. Nuclear testing at the Nevada test site ceased in '92, and since, themed resorts were popping up everywhere. Firstly, the MGM Grand, Luxor, and Treasure Island opened. The Bellagio, the Monte Carlo, the Venetian, and Mandalay Bay followed a few years later. In the 90s, Nevadans also saw the infamous World Trade Center bombing, Nirvana's benefit gig at Cow Palace for sex abuse victims, and the Rodney King trial was heard as he suffered police brutality, spurning 3-day riots, campaigning against the obvious racism involved. It was a busy time for this little area of the Mojave Desert, and it went through something of an identity crisis. But the end result saw a complete regeneration of this spot, resulting in a place deemed the entertainment capital of the world. But with all the new money coming in, Las Vegas was also quickly becoming a dream target for career criminals.
I mean, they are essentially banks with massive amounts of money all stored in one place.
For most, this remained a dream, however, as there were and are few successful robberies in this city where thieves evaded capture. 21-year-old Heather and her accomplice were a surprising exception to this rule. Frankie, tell us about today's criminals.
So Heather Tallchief and Roberto Solis were the perpetrators of this crime, and an unlikely duo, a 47-year-old poet and murderer, and a 21-year-old good-looking girl that pulled off a heist even seasoned criminals might have struggled with. I'll begin with Roberto Solis. Born in 1945, he was of average height and weight, with brown eyes and brown hair, and wasn't bad looking. You wouldn't think that there was anything suspicious about him at first glance. His only real defining characteristic is a tattoo on his right forearm reading Esta Vida Loca, which means this crazy life. He seemed thoughtful, well-read, and was a very convincing talker. At the young age of 24, in 1969, Roberto Solis shot a 61-year-old armoured van driver, Louis Dake, twice in the back, whilst attempting to steal money. What's worse is that just before Dake was shot, he showed Solis the money bag was empty by turning it inside out. He left the father of 6 to die. Solis was caught and sentenced and served his time in Folsom State Prison, California. Whilst inside, he became a poet under the pseudonym Pancho Aguila, who weirdly has a poetry book on Amazon.
He actually wrote 5 books and can be found in 6 anthologies. Some well-known writers of the time even wrote to the parole board asking for them to grant him leniency.
But whilst he was writing poetry, was he also meticulously planning his next robbery? After 24 years, Solis was finally granted parole in September 1991. He came out smarter, stronger, and with a clearer vision, but certainly was not a changed man. He assumed the name Julius Suave, one of at least 30 aliases he is said to have had.
Suave? What a surname to give yourself!
Roberto Solis's collection of poems under his pseudonym name Pancho Aguila are full of wants, the desire for intimacy, reinvention, excitement, freedom, and what it feels like to be wanted in a different way, by the law. Roberto makes light work of wooing a young Heather Tallchief, maybe targeting her for this very reason, and it's not long before she worships the ground he walks on. Heather Tallchief is a beauty, a mix of Seneca Indian from her father and Italian American from her mother. Born in Buffalo, New York, her upbringing allegedly was abusive, thanks to her father, a drunk and an addict. When she was just 2 years old, her parents split and her mother moved away to California, leaving her in the less than capable hands of her father, Fred Tallchief. Fred spoke about his addictions and parenting, saying, "Whatever it was, it didn't matter. It took me a quart of beer and a bag of glue, and I was a glue sniffer. I don't like the taste of alcohol, so I'd sniff the glue to get the alcohol down, and I just stayed that way for the next 12 years of my life." Fred managed to get sober and remarried when Heather was 8, and ended up having 4 more children. He admits that, because she was the first, I made a lot of mistakes. I had no guidelines. I was just shooting from the hip, you know?
But despite her less than nurturing upbringing, Heather was intelligent, sensitive, and vulnerable, described by her sister Elaine as a natural leader and trendsetter.
Heather was unhappy at home. Thankfully, her mother returned in 1988 and took her back with her on a bus to San Francisco. Her life unfortunately continued to spiral. Left out at school, she fell into the wrong crowd and ended up addicted to crack. A friend wrote to the press with a 1988 yearbook for the Buffalo Academy of the Sacred Heart, where she and Heather were once students. Inside, you can find a black and white photograph of Heather posing on some steps. The caption reads, "A genuine uniqueness and an extraordinary sense of personal style radiates from sophomore Heather Tallchief as she expresses her ability to contrast colours."
That sounds nice enough, but then maybe unique is a polite description for a little weird or a bit of an outcast?
Eventually, she managed to pass a general equivalency diploma, which is an all-round test similar to a high school diploma, which she followed up with a nursing assistant certificate. After that, she began working in hospitals and clinics in the San Fran area that struggled keeping down a job. By 1991, she was working in an AIDS hospice called Kimberly Quality Care Center in a troubled part of town. One of the senior nurses described her. "She was a great worker. She had this amazing empathy with patients. Even the ones closest to death would be smiling when she left their bedside. She worked there for just over a year and sadly saw around 20 patients pass away in that time. She was very close to her patients and this took a heavy emotional toll on her. She was very private and kept her struggle quiet until she opened up to a friend and her mum. She told them her life wasn't making any sense, that she was struggling to find happiness, especially with money worries and those around her continually dying. Up until this point, she'd always cared for others over looking after herself, which she enjoyed, just like her hobby of studying Mexican art and Mayan ceramics."
Sounds like she wanted or maybe needed more.
After reaching this turning point in her life, the young Tallchief made the shock decision to leave San Francisco, surprising family and friends. Out partying one night, she met Mr. Solis, who was more than 20 years her senior, through a mutual friend, and he bought her a drink. When she went to his apartment for the first time, she chose to ignore the goat's head on the altar in the living room, or the countless crystals, candles, incense, and tarot cards, and grew to accept his beliefs.
That would surely ring alarm bells.
I mean, for me, the goat's head would do it. After he read her tarot cards, she was only more impressed. Their lives were entwined, and their spiritual journey to the land of casinos was set. Disregarding an admission of his criminal past a few weeks into their relationship, they moved to Mexico together and began preparations. In the months leading up to the crime, to help them set up, Solis helped Tallchief look for a job. He brought home an application for a job with Loomis, the armoured vehicle courier company, the same company he had robbed all those years ago. Heather, eager to please, filled out the application and bagged an interview with Mike Tawney for the role of armoured vehicle driver, supplying cash to casinos. Mike said, "She told us she wanted a career in the security industry. She said she wanted to start at the bottom to learn the industry inside out. Her want for a job in this industry was unusual. Normally you'd expect muscly men used to this kind of role. But Heather was beautiful and had no experience to date. Regardless, she bagged the job after a clean bill of health and criminal record. Heather became a model employee very quickly, and it didn't go unnoticed from Loomis's management team. In only her second week, she'd exceeded expectations on the firing range to qualify for her sidearm, achieving record scores.
I wonder if she had any previous firearm experience. Or can you just be a natural?
She proved her commitment, diligence, and trustworthiness on the less risky casino house runs filling tables. All of her colleagues said that she had a great sense of humour and real passion for the job, a far cry from her San Francisco days. In fact, she didn't really open up about her past to her new colleagues. All they knew was that she'd come from a career in nursing. Generally, she redirected, asking them questions about their kids or families.
And I guess that wasn't a red flag for anyone. It was clear she cared about people.
Yeah, colleagues became friends, and Tallchief was well liked, sometimes drawing a bit too much attention from her kind nature and good looks. She wore thick glasses, hair tied back neatly with a bow, and big, chunky workman boots to blend in. A promotion was soon on the cards, and she stepped up to cash machine runs, where she'd drive millions of dollars in unmarked bills up and down the strip with her two colleagues. 5 days a week. Tallchief rode with Steve Marshall and Scott Stewart on these trips for the next 6 months. They had many pleasant conversations. They genuinely enjoyed her company, and she won their trust and confidence. Jobs were completed quickly because they could both deliver the cash, whilst Tall Chief circled the surroundings if the parking was bad. All the while, Solace and Tall Chief lived in the unassuming Mark I apartments that were often rented by gambling industry employees. Heather spent most of her time completing laps in the pool, whilst her partner watched on, writing poetry. No one asked any questions. The apartment manager told the newspaper that Miss Tall Chief and her older boyfriend were very private. She would go out to the pool and swim a lot, the manager said, and everyone would talk about how pretty she was, but he never hung around the front. He always used the back stairs.
That's a bit weird in your own home.
Elaine Tall Chief, Heather's sister, had not heard of Roberto Solis. Heather's last visit home to Buffalo was to help her stepmother prepare for the birth of her brother in 1992. Elaine said, "I was sleeping in my mother's bed, and she woke up and she said, 'All right, I'm leaving.' And she gave me a kiss on the head, and I remember thinking I wanted to get up and give her a hug, and how sad I was that she was leaving. I just didn't want her to leave at all, because I hated when she left. It's like when she's there, she's got such energy, and she's so outgoing." After she left that morning, her brother Skylar was born, and the family never heard from her. Heather Tall Chief tells her dad, "Dad, I'm going to Las Vegas. When I get set up, I'll call you." And then, a couple of months later, in 1993, there's a knock at Fred Tall Chief's door, and the FBI are stood waiting on the porch. Lauren, tell us what happened on the day of the theft.
It's 8 a.m, Friday, October 1st, 1993, when Scott Stewart, a Loomis courier, his partner Steve Marshall, and his fairly new driver, Heather Tall Chief, leave the company depot with $6 million in tow. It's all in cash and quite a sight. The large-sized Loomis van filled from about a third of the way from the front of the vehicle all the way to the back. They begin their casino rounds. At 9:10, on their busiest day of the week, they pull up at the Circus Casino, with now $3.5 million in the back. Scott notices Tall Chief has a fancy pair of shoes on, rather than her bog-standard work boots, but naturally assumes she's got a dinner date straight after work. Scott and Steve hop out, bags filled. They routinely close the van doors, lock them, double-check that they are locked, and hit the back of the van to indicate to Heather she's good to go. The men begin a 30-minute walk around the casino floor with $400,000 to fill up all of the ATMs. On a typical day, after finishing up at the exit, they meet Tall Chief at the side entrance, who picks them up. All continue on to the next casino and the next, offloading the cash until the van is empty. However, this time when they finish up, they wait for Tall Chief. She should be ready and waiting. They wait and wait some more, but she is nowhere to be seen. Is she okay? Trusting and liking Heather, they're hesitant to call it in. Maybe she's lost. She is new after all.
They're friends with Heather, so the last thing they want is to get her in trouble.
But then what if she's hurt? She could have been targeted. It's not like their job didn't come with a warning tag. Things have gone wrong for others in their profession before.
I read that Stewart later said, "When my partner and I exited the casino, we did not see the van anywhere. So I, in joking, suggested that she might have taken the vehicle."
Stewart eventually bites the bullet and calls the main office, and another armoured vehicle swiftly picks them up. At this point, everyone aware of what's going on here is getting worried. Has something awful happened to her? Maybe she's been kidnapped. All sorts of things are racing through their heads.
She's obviously by herself as well. That's some pretty serious lone working. I wonder what the pay was like. I certainly wouldn't be happy driving around a van, armoured or not, that contained $3 million.
All the staff can do is sweep the area. There's no tracking or GPS. Meanwhile, they continually radio Tall Chief's van to no avail. This is fast getting out of hand. How can an armoured van disappear in broad daylight? The police are called, and Police Sergeant Larry Dewis is assigned to the case, but even he admits he's mystified. How does a van vanish?
Did they make any more headway?
Well, no, they are baffled. The FBI launched an investigation and assign Agent Joseph Dushek to the case. Dushek requests the CCTV footage from the casino. Clear as day, Tall Chief drives away alone.
Surely that'd be the first thing you do. So it definitely wasn't kidnapped then.
Well, at this point, all are dumbfounded. If this is a burglary, this is one of the largest armoured vehicle heists in Las Vegas history. So then we have the investigation. Like with most crimes where the prime suspect is on the run, the first port of call in the investigation is to visit their apartment, mainly in the hope of catching them frantically packing a bag. But of course, by now, you probably have realised that Heather Tallchief is smarter than your average criminal. The apartment she shared with her boyfriend, Roberto Solis, was empty, but police were able to establish 2 defined sets of fingerprints, Tallchief and Solis. With Solis nowhere to be found, the police immediately consider that they are in it together.
At first, they thought the print was actually a man named Gabriel Suave, and that was who they put out the federal warrant for on October 7th, alongside one for Heather. But Gabriel Suave was just another pseudonym, the authorities would soon discover, for Roberto Solis.
The only shreds of potential evidence which might guide them on their way were several art magazines with pages torn out. Maybe they were going to invest in art and become dealers? But then again, this could just be a false lead, or Tallchief simply pursuing a hobby, as many of them contained articles on Mayan art.
Heather did leave behind a letter to her mother, which expressed regret at their recent estrangement. Instead of posting it, she'd left it there to be found in the apartment. She said in the letter that it was doubtful she'd see her mother again, but told her not to fret, for we have never been true friends.
The truck was nowhere to be seen and the couple had vanished. 2 hours after the theft from the casino, a strange couple arrived at a small local airport. A private jet had been chartered to Denver, Colorado. Joseph Dushek, the FBI agent, says it was Solis and Tallchief in disguise. Solis looked like an older gentleman, a doctor, and Tallchief like a sickly older lady. Only 3 small suitcases were taken. If he had $1 million to $3 million, it would take approximately 8 to 10 suitcases to transport that much money. We surmise that they must have shipped the money on ahead. They know this because they managed to obtain a lead. A limousine driver in Colorado told the FBI that he had picked up a very curious couple from the Denver airport.
Riding in style, or like a teenager en route to her super sweet 16.
From this, Dushek worked backwards. He checked for flights out of Las Vegas. It was a busy airport at the time though. There were around 1,800 a day on average. But luckily he found a couple of charter pilots who remembered an odd couple with a similar description. Dushek said he remembered that she appeared in a wheelchair as an elderly woman. The male was like a doctor. They only took 2 small packages. When they landed in Denver and got up to exit the plane and meet the chauffeur, I recall the pilot told our agents up in Denver, "A miracle has happened. She can get up and walk now." Imagine the shock of these pilots. She literally just stood up, disregarding her disguise and leaving the wheelchair behind.
So they'd found them?
Well, annoyingly for the FBI, following and collecting this information took them 3 days, by which time the fugitives were gone. The trouble was that all the clues led in multiple potential directions: Florida, the Caribbean, and Central and South America. The FBI had no solid leads and simply didn't have the resources to narrow it down. The police managed to find an address that indicated that the couple escaped to Florida. They arrived at the address, and it turned out to be something far less exciting. It was a postal drop. The box did, however, contain 2 forged passports for entry to a place called Suriname in South America, but they couldn't be sure if this was their intended destination or simply a false lead to throw them off the scent. 2 weeks later, a rental manager became suspicious and forced open the doors to one of his warehouse buildings at 708 South 1st Street. Inside, he found the armoured car and alerted the authorities. Solis and Tallchief had in fact rented this space. Solis told the rental manager all about his phony business called Steel Reinforcement Incorporated, which was used as the cover of repairing armoured vehicles to ward off suspicion if one day an armoured van drove in. Special Agent Grant D. Ashley said it was all part of their grand plan. Solis opened his business under the guise of retrofitting vehicles to be used as armoured car vehicles. In that manner, it didn't draw any attention to the other people in the area when a real armoured vehicle was brought into the facility.
Very clever guys.
There were some clues in the van, mainly shipping supplies for the money. Also left behind was Tallchief's clothing, probably from when she changed into her disguise. The last thing they found was money and telephone numbers for businesses in Miami, the Bahamas, and the Cayman Islands.
That's really weird to leave money behind. I thought they were stealing it.
Well, Agent Dushek said that perhaps the leftover packages were those that they weren't able to ship. At the end of the day, they got away with millions, so a few thousand was a drop in the ocean. It was time for fresh eyes. Walt Stowe was assigned to this case and brought on board as FBI special agent in charge. His first act was to pursue travel record leads that suggested the couple had fled to Mexico.
I guess that kind of makes sense because we know they were there before Vegas.
Stowe discovered more information to support this theory. In the days leading up to the heist, Solis and Tallchief had a conversation with a local business manager. He said the pair were making the move to Mexico permanently and that Solis gave him a business card should he wish to get in contact with them. The company on the card was Tech C Consultants in San Isidro, California, and provided a few forwarding addresses via a postbox in San Diego. Stowe checked out the addresses in Mexico, hoping the pair had messed up. Rarely crimes are committed perfectly. Normally some mistakes are made. However, it quickly became clear that this was simply meant to lead them on a wild goose chase and that the addresses were left deliberately. It was false information intentionally left to waste FBI resources and buy the couple some more time.
They really did think of everything.
Weeks passed that led to years. Time was running away from the FBI and they still did not have much to go on. 4 years went by, and Heather Tallchief was now listed number 3 on the FBI's most sought-after fugitives.
That's actually the highest recorded position for a female felon in 23 years.
Normally, this would warrant fresh leads with the fame from the position, but she remained as elusive as ever. Lloyd's of London, insurers of the armoured car company, even offered a reward of £200,000 for her capture. Agent Dushek was noted to have said, "The FBI kept it very active. We did everything we could to see if they would make a mistake and would suddenly pop up." Sadly for Dushek, he retired in 2001 without ever knowing why she did it. The FBI continued to try and piece together everything that happened and couldn't help but marvel at the skill and planning that must have gone into this heist. The fact Tallchief and Solis remained shrouded in mystery, even with some of the sharpest minds, placed the pair high in their esteem. FBI agent Burke Smith told a reporter for the Calgary Herald in 1995, "I'm not going to badmouth somebody I haven't caught." Although he could appreciate the skill of the heist, he expressed doubt because even though successfully making off with millions of dollars was exciting, how long would that last? The pair would most definitely be looking over their shoulders, and that would exhaust anyone eventually. "Would you want to live that way?" Smith asked.
And Larry Dewis, the Las Vegas police sergeant, also said something quite similar. He said, "Of course I don't like the word perfect crime, but it appears that it was very well executed."
Although Fred Tallchief, Heather's father, and the rest of the family was of a different camp. He said, "A lot of people thought it was a great thing, you know? This 21-year-old kid gets away with $3 million. She rips off the casinos, the insurance companies, like a Robin Hood. She beat the system." That's the way they looked at it. It's a 21-year-old kid with money, with a convicted murderer. My worst thought was he dumped her in the ocean for $3 million. It's the loss of a child, whether she's dead or she comes back and she has to go to jail for 30 years. It was the loss of a child for me. Heather's family and friends still couldn't quite believe she had anything to do with it. It seemed so out of character. She must have really been under Solis's spell. The FBI said that it was one of the biggest armoured van robberies where the thieves had not been captured. The Tallchiefs were told by FBI that they had her listed as armed and dangerous, with 2 registered handguns, and warned if they apprehend, they're going to shoot to kill. At this point, the police weren't holding out much hope for Heather. Sergeant Dewis of Las Vegas Police Department was quoted to have said in 1997, "We thought for sure we'd find her body out in the desert, maybe with the burnt-out truck alongside. I hope there aren't too many like her out there. We rely on our criminals to be dumb."
Knowing her accomplice was a murderer, her poor family must have thought deep down she was killed by him.
Crime programs like America's Most Wanted broadcast this case repeatedly, but although it seemed the trail had gone cold, the case was about to be blown wide open.
In this day and age, you would normally expect criminals to make a mistake. Technology is much more sophisticated, and those on the run are often tripped up by this. Not Heather and Roberto. Miss Tallchief wasn't caught, but in September 2005, 12 years later, she was tired of running. "Arrest me," Heather said, walking into the Lloyd George US Courthouse, Las Vegas. Attorneys Daniel Albrechts and Bob Axelrod accompanied their client there, where she surrendered. Now 33 years of age, Tallchief was tired of her life on the run, and the guilt was too great.
Imagine that. For her family and the investigators all that time later.
While Fred was at work when a friend told him the news, he said, "Heather just turned herself in." And it was just like that same feeling, like when she did it, that shaking inside. My nerves were just shaking. Special Agent Grant D. Ashley of the Las Vegas FBI said, "Heather Tallchief applied for the job with the armoured car company approximately 2 months before the robbery, and the investigation has led us to believe that this entire event, from the moment of applying for the job to the robbery, was all planned in advance for the sole purpose of committing this crime." It was clear Heather meant to finish as she started. In March, prior to her arrest, Heather Tallchief called Bob Axelrod to let him know of her plans to turn herself in. He'd already had experience representing Americans arrested in Europe, so they kept the plans quiet whilst everything was put into motion. Heather travelled from the Netherlands using a British passport she had obtained under the name Donna Marie Eaton. Her attorneys helped set up a press conference to be held just before she was taken into custody to frame the story early, and on her own terms. In fact, Daniel Albrechts only notified the US Attorney Assistant 10 minutes before surrender, giving them no warning. For the second time, Heather Tallchief was a front-page story in Las Vegas, as she had been 12 years before.
Sergeant Dewis, who we mentioned earlier, said, "I used the term shark bait. I thought that they may have just gotten rid of her. Now there's no witness. He had all the money himself. So I was extremely surprised when she showed up. But why did she turn herself in?"
Heather Tallchief's attorney, Robert Axelrod, said, "Solis practiced a cultish, druid, crazy sort of form of religion involving sexual magic that she allowed him to convince her was the way to a greater enlightenment. She was so much under the influence of Roberto Solis, who was an incredible criminal con man. Once he told her that if the authorities ever saw her or identified her, they would shoot to kill, and that she was the only suspect, not him. She had never seen any of the news about this, and she believed him. And she found that she was pregnant. Solis did not treat Heather well, especially after the baby was born, regularly moving other women into the home they shared. Her story was clear from the start. Heather accused Solis of brainwashing her, and claimed that she only committed the crime because she feared for her life. She came to the conclusion it was best for her and her son if she ran away. So 2 months after she'd given birth, she fled into the night with their child, about $1,000 in cash, and never saw Roberto Solis again. All of the stolen money was left with him, so she was forced to start again with no support financially or otherwise. Tallchief says to fund her son and her, she worked legally as a prostitute in Amsterdam for a few years, eventually ending up taking a job cleaning rooms in the same hotel.
That doesn't sound nice. Imagine living that way with no friends or family either.
Her situation did improve though when Heather met a man she ended up in a relationship with. Her son, now 10, treated him like a father, and she finally had more stability. Axelrod said, "Her son has always known that there was a secret. He has always known that he had to behave in a certain way, that he had to live a low profile. He would have had to have lived a false identity with her for the rest of his life." Her decision to surrender, Albrecht said, was because Heather hoped that her son was old enough to understand, but to forgive. Also, Tall Chief wanted to be able to marry her now fiancé, but wouldn't be able to without regaining her true identity. She's been wanting to do it for a very long time, but simply couldn't until she was sure that her son would be taken care of, Ulbrich said. It was clear Heather wanted a better life for her son, yet to still allow him to grow older than a toddler, so that he wouldn't know what it was like to be left motherless at such a young age.
With her own mother leaving at 2 years old, she knew what this was like all too well.
I truly feel this is the right thing to do, Tall Chief told the newspapers. I also have a little boy I'm thinking about. I'm doing this for him. I feel that by turning myself in and surrendering, I can give him a better life, one that he deserves.
Her little boy didn't have a real name, a home country. As far as the system knew, he didn't exist.
Yeah, she desperately wanted to offer him more stability and normality. She dropped her son off at school the day she left and said, I told him to practice his guitar, have fun at his sporting club, do his homework, and I'll see you soon.
I know she's done some pretty bad stuff, but that must have taken guts and been very upsetting for her.
Heather pleaded guilty to bank and credit union embezzlement and passport fraud. She could potentially receive 40 years in federal prison. Her lawyer said that he was confident she'd get no more than 10 years. She came here to admit her responsibility, to accept her responsibility, and face the music, Mr. Axelrod said. If you're living in prison mentally, Heather said, then what is a box, a room, restricted privileges? It's nothing compared to what I've already been through. I truly feel like I'm setting myself free. It's a lonely life being a fugitive.
I often think that looking at these cases, is it ever really worth it? Committing these grand thefts, you're either going to be caught or will be looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. It sounds rather miserable. On the day of the sentencing, Heather Tallchief dressed smartly in pale-coloured trousers, a blouse and suit jacket, although she had her ankles shackled. Her lawyers encouraged a national media frenzy. Robert Axelrod had already interviewed his client on videotape in hopes of selling her story to Hollywood, and that the proceeds could reimburse the company for the stolen money. On the condition that they didn't publish until her surrender, they allowed the New York Times to observe the interview and ask follow-up questions. They even bargained on the fact that a screenplay might be written. We're hoping that the world will see her as a sympathetic figure, and so will the court, Axelrod told reporters gathered outside the courthouse. In the courtroom, Heather maintained a calm demeanour and answered all routine questions posed to her. Defence lawyers didn't object when Tallchief was told she must remain in custody as she posed a flight risk.
They didn't really have a choice on that one, surely.
She pleaded guilty before Chief U.S. District Judge Philip Pro to 1 count of bank embezzlement, 1 count of credit union embezzlement, and 1 count of possession of a fraudulently obtained passport. Heather admitted to helping Solis steal approximately $3 million, but her defense attorney presented, for mitigation, the testimony of a psychiatrist who concluded that Solis had brainwashed Heather. Their claim was that Solis had carefully selected her in the bar that night. She was pretty, young, and vulnerable. His sex magic and hypnosis casually overrode her day-to-day judgment. It all started when he read her tarot cards.
What were the cards, do we know?
Heather recounted that. One was fortune, and the other was the temptress, or the lust card. This was like fate. I was supposed to embark on a spiritual path, an awakening, an enlightenment by somebody great and powerful and knowledgeable. She also said that each morning before work he played audio tapes to her. It was a man's voice amidst increasingly strange sounds that would count down from 10 to 1. Then she'd wake up from what seemed to have been a deep sleep, remembering nothing. She believed it was then that he had convinced her to take part in the robbery while she was in this suggestible state. Tallchief said, I worshipped him and believed everything he said.
He sounds like he has the makings of a cult leader.
Before going to Vegas, they went to Mexico, where Solis had plastic surgery. In Mexico, he introduced her to peyote and books on devil worship. He directed me to make a hooded magician's cape for him and a plain cape for myself. We wore these frequently.
That's pretty mad. Also, dare I ask what sex magic is?
Well, Heather said, we called it sex magic. It's a ritual, spiritual and the physical combined, and you use it to manifest ideas, wills, powers, and energy. Basically, they invoked gods and goddesses and let them take over her body, and she was swept away. It's the concept that sexual energy is a potent force that can be harnessed to transcend one's normally perceived reality. She believes he made her do it and bewitched her with his spiritualism and forced her to act. However, the prosecution did push that the offence was more likely motivated by greed and the desire to please Solace. She has been noted to say in an interview, he was reformed, he wrote poetry, I knew his mother, he was a very normal person. If you sat down and met him, you would probably actually enjoy him. You would laugh at his jokes. You would think he was a nice person. There was never anything about him that you would think he was a heinous, horrible, murdering con.
Which makes me think it wasn't just a case of him bewitching her. That statement to me sounds pretty rational.
Other things she admitted in the trial were that rather than collecting the Loomis workers, Scott Stewart and Steve Marshall, she instead drove the vehicle to the rented garage to meet her crime partner, Roberto Solis.
I do feel sorry for the Loomis drivers. I picked up this quote from a bounty hunter, Dave Chipman, who was trying to find Heather. I'm not surprised Loomis were fooled. She had perfect credit, and Kimberly gave her a glowing reference. She was way above average for the industry. It was only natural they'd give a sweet girl like her the keys to the safe.
Here they packed the money, assumed their disguises and fled. First to Denver, on to Miami and beyond. In fact, the plane took off at 11:32 a.m., right around the time the Loomis staff alerted the police to the van's disappearance and Heather's supposed abduction. The court heard of how she lived overseas under fake identities, including the name Donna Marie Eaton, which she had obtained with false documentation from the UK Passport Agency in February 1997. This was the moniker she used to return to the US. A representative of Loomis urged the court to impose the maximum sentence to punish Heather, and the judge agreed. The offence was serious and sophisticated enough to merit the full 63-month sentence. Heather Tallchief was ordered to pay $2,994,083.83 in recompense to the victims. After the judge read her verdict, she told reporters that at last she felt free.
The irony of finally feeling free on your way to prison.
Heather Tallchief served her time and has since been released. In June 2010, she was given parole. I tried looking up where she is now, but understandably she's kept a very low profile and once again is hard to find. She hasn't done any interviews since and seems uncontactable, but then I'm not sure this is much of a surprise. She has already lived 12 years under the radar, so she's pretty good at it.
Hopefully she's been reunited with her son and is now married to her fiancé.
When asked by a news reporter in one of her last appearances, couldn't you have just continued your life on the run for the rest of your life, rather successfully? Heather replied, oh yes. And as for Roberto Solis, well, he was charged with the offence, but he is very much still a fugitive, and the missing money has never been found. There's talk he's living somewhere outside the United States in luxury.
By the sounds of it, with a new face.
They believe that during the 1990s gold rush, Solis made some shrewd investments with the stolen money from the looting. It's even rumoured that he invested in the early US online casino software. Tallchief was confident that had she not turned herself in, she would still be in the Netherlands evading capture. Needless to say, all sources seem to come to the conclusion that Solis, now 74 years old, is certainly not on the run, and more likely sunning it up with a cocktail in hand, pen to paper, without a care in the world.
As far as conspiracies go, there is the suggestion that Heather Tallchief was in fact the instigator of the whole thing. We found this quote from Anne Tallchief, Heather's mother. She was travelling with this guy called Roberto. It was bad enough when she quit nursing, but we had a bad row about Roberto. This is likely to be the reason for their estrangement and Heather's bitter letter she left for her mother in the apartment. Anne knew of Roberto's checkered past and wished her daughter better. Some say Heather in fact targeted Solis and wrote him letters in jail. There are also witnesses who say that their relationship seemed platonic and that there was nothing romantic about it. bit of a far cry from the supposed sex magic and adoration that Heather spoke about in the court case, and to the media. To add to the conspiracy, Heather said in her first interview that she only had one driving license, but it turns out she acquired passports and accumulated more licenses in different names. By the beginning of 1993, she had a total of 12.
It seems weird she lies about that in the interview. Surely she would know she'd be found out.
Maybe she thought that since she'd gotten away with everything for so long that she wouldn't.
Or to play devil's advocate, I suppose this could have been the work of Solis, if he had her information and was very used to doing this for himself.
Well, as 1993 progressed, she or he then used the licenses to apply for credit cards using all her different names, maybe to start booking the getaway. She took flying lessons and even started applying to law enforcement colleges. Loomis obviously saw this as someone who was aspiring for an honest career, which only increased their trust for her. Once she was promoted, it wasn't long before Heather started making her final plans for the heist. She gathered detailed lists of the convention schedules and checkout times for all the hotels. If she picked the busiest times, her plan would run without a hitch, because parking on these days was simply not an option. Seems like Heather had worked out the perfect day to implement her plan.
Oh, that's really interesting, because if we'd started with this story as what we believe was the truth, I might believe it.
Yeah, I know, right? If there wasn't so much more on the other theory, I would too. I guess we have to also consider that she could have spun us a massive story.
Well, now we come to the conclusion, and really whoever was responsible for this plan, even if it was a dual effort, they pulled off one of the top 10 casino heists of all time. Considering how many casino heists are foiled before they've even set foot out the door, this story is pretty impressive. And although be it a crime, it is nice to see a leading lady.
Yeah, it's also pretty remarkable that both Roberto and Heather weren't big-time criminals, but they managed to pull off such a big crime, and would likely both be out there evading capture if Heather hadn't turned herself in.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Head to our website www.careercriminalspodcast.com to find a copy of our transcript read here today and details of our sources. If you'd like to get in touch, give us a follow on Instagram, which is @careercriminalspodcast. Feel free to directly message us via this platform with your thoughts on this case or any interesting info you think we may have missed. Lastly, please do take the time to leave us an iTunes review, as we rely on these to help more people discover this podcast. Today's episode was written and hosted by Lauren Miles and Frankie Forrester. The production was by Lauren, and music by YK Productions.
So Lauren, for a little bit of light relief after our case, the Circus casino heist, we come again to my special little segment.
Woohoo!
Come with me on a journey. This is the story of a tiny little gentleman called Dirk.
Dirk! Okay.
It's the 14th of April 2012. The target has been chosen. Well, in a roundabout way. We are on the Gold Coast in Australia, following two Welshmen and an unnamed mate, having the time of their lives travelling. Rhys Jones, his pal Kerry Mules, and an unnamed man were partying one night and came up with a crackerjack plan. Booze-fueled madness was about to entail. The men found themselves in a water park, the type that also keeps animals. While I'm sure some of us are guilty of jumping in a swimming pool fully clothed when drunk, I certainly am, the trio, however, has the nous to strip down before having a casual swim with the dolphins. However, this is not the crime we're talking about in this story. Rhys and Kerry's night of antics didn't stop there. They even let off an extinguisher in the shark enclosure.
What?
I want to know what they were drinking, because it sounds like a little more than the vodka they admitted to. They committed one last crime before stumbling back to their apartments. I'll give you a hint. Poor little Dirk was about to have a little adventure, leaving his mate, Peaches, behind.
Oh no, what animal's Dirk?
You'll have to find out. The three men woke up the next morning with staggering headaches and hazy memories. Something was about to jolt them all into action. Little 7-year-old Dirk was wandering around their rented, carpeted apartment. Dirk wasn't a small child. Dirk was none other than a little fairy penguin.
Oh my god, this is literally a scene from The Hangover.
Yeah. What do you do with a stolen penguin, Lauren? You pop it in the shower, give it some grub, and then set it free in the canal.
In the canal?
I know. Poor Dirk had lived a life in captivity and had no idea how to survive in the wild. Luckily, a local couple saw him floundering about, chased out the water by something, and then chased back in by a dog. After a quick internet search, it became clear that little Dirk was a missing penguin, and they alerted the authorities. The penguin was in reasonable health, although exhausted, when he was rescued late on Sunday evening, said the water park. Had we not got him, it wouldn't have been a very good situation at all in the long term for Dirk. Information from the public also helped locate Dirk's abductors. Police, following a tip-off, located the tree on Facebook. These boys really should know better. The friends' lawyers told magistrates they didn't mean Dirk any harm, and also told them they had written an apology to the water park. The judge accepted an appeal not to record convictions against them and fined them each $1,000. Jones, 21, and Mules, 20, pleaded guilty to trespassing and stealing and keeping a protected animal. The judge said, "You could have found yourselves in a morgue if you'd gone into the wrong enclosure. Perhaps next time you're at a party, you'll consider drinking a little less vodka." Dirk has been reunited with his girlfriend Peaches after this small guy's big adventure.
That is crazy. I'm surprised they got off with just that, to be honest.
Yeah, they didn't even get convictions.
And they were in swimming with the dolphins. I think they should have got a little bit of time for that. And it does not sound to me like they were just drinking that night. That sounds to me like some sort of trip.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks again for listening to True Crime by Indie Drop-In. If you would like your show featured, reach out to us at Indie Drop-In on all social media or go to indiedropin.com. See you next time.